Welcome to the Venture Capital Podcast. Go to www.vc.fm if you have questions. Today, we're going to talk about what questions founders ask VCs. And my guess is probably the same questions everyone always asks, right? Or no?
Well,
are there new ones?
I don't think it's like, what do they ask? It's what should they ask?
Oh, what should they ask?
What should they ask?
They should ask nothing, pack up, and leave.
They should just be like, please give me money. Thank you. And then go.
What questions should they ask?
I don't know. In your experience, what questions have you seen? What kinds of things came to light after a founder took money that ended up being like pretty critical that they should have known about or would have been really helpful to know about before they did that deal?
For my experiences on deals that I've done, and mine's probably different. I think a lot of deals go south. A lot of startup deals go south.
Yeah.
I think there are things that people say that aren't in the docs.
Mm-hmm.
And those terms can come back and haunt you for years.
What do you mean by that?
One of the deals I had a liquidation anti-dilution right in it. Mm-hmm. And in my mind, I knew it was an aggressive deal, an aggressive term.
Yeah. Should
have known better. But at the time, the group that we did it with, I figured, hey, they're my friends. If I need to change, I can always change. And then we realized once the game's in play, that what people say versus what's in the contract is a very different thing.
So people don't really read or understand the contracts.
Mm-hmm.
They just go off of what people say.
I think I understood what was in the contract, and you expected, like, you think the best. And when people are in negotiations, they don't think the best; they think about them.
Right. So it's kind of like the interpretation of the contract.
So what question? So the things I've been impressed with lately is some of the founders that have raised locally have told me they've come and talked to you, and they said they got better advice from you than some of their other VC friends.
Well, that's very flattering. I don't know why they felt that way. But.
And I don't know the specifics. I was riding with this founder in their car, and they said, you talked about a better way to structure the deal. And when he went to his VC, the VC agreed and said yes. And he's like, then what are you telling me about? Right. But I think a lot of those are very circumstantial. And in this case, that person also had acquired a business.
Yep. I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
There we go. Maybe you can talk more about it without the background. But anyways.
No, but I mean, I think all of this gets to this point of, like, I don't know, really like figuring out who the VC is as a person. Right. Mm-hmm. I don't know about you, but I feel like there's like a lot of like two-facedness in the venture community, where like when things are going well, like every VC wants to be your friend and they think you're like super cool. And they are like also like the first to kind of like trash you when things don't go well as a founder. And so like teasing out like the integrity of a VC, I think is really important. And like, I don't know. So some of the things that I like question wise is, tell me about some deals that failed, and how did your firm respond? Like, how do you think about failure, since failure happens the majority of the time in your portfolio? It happens in every portfolio, right?
But if you ask that question, they're not going to fund you.
No, they may not, right? It depends on how hot your startup is.
But this is where
if it's super hot, they will, because the cardinal sin in venture is not doing a deal that loses money. It's not doing the deal that makes a ton of money, right? That's what kills your career. So
there's 5 deals in Utah every year that matter, maybe 5.
Yeah,
and if you're not in those 5, and there's 30 other VCs, and if the next time those VCs go to raise, if you're not in the majority of those deals, they'll just go to the fund who was.
Right. So
it's the same cost, 2 and 20.
Yep.
It's all the same. Just pick the person or the firm who can pick the winner.
Yep. So look, I think you can ask hard questions of VCs. VCs can ask hard questions of founders. I don't know why it can't be the other way around.
I feel like when you ask so here's the secret. When you start asking VCs hard questions, no one else does, and it's like negging. Have you heard of the frame negging when it comes to the dating world?
No, talk to me about negging.
So there's a book. I think it was like The Secret Life of a Pickup Artist. I read it when I was in college.
Yep.
And one of the stories in there is he says he was at a bar. He went and talked to a girl, and he says you say something that's supposed to be cute, but they don't know if it's cute or upsetting. And he said he's like, hey, your teeth remind me of Bugs Bunny.
Yeah.
And so the point is it throws their game. Everyone's always, they're the pretty girl in the room is used to being, sought after. Same with the VCs.
Sure.
And when you start pushing back, but you're not pushing back like, hey, you're wrong, because every founder does that too.
Yeah.
But asking them the questions like, hey, why should I take your money? It changes the game.
It does.
I think if I were to raise it again, I'd probably, the first thing I would do is I'd say, why should I pick you over another firm that we're talking to?
Yeah. I mean, it does create a little bit of FOMO. I will say though, you do have to walk a line, which is, I've also been with founders that are like super aggressive on that kind of stuff. And I'm like, I don't know that I really want to work with this person. Right. Like it's like, I am happy to like talk through, challenging things and answer hard questions. But if somebody's just like, yeah, why do you deserve to breathe the same air I do? I'm just kind of like, I'm kind of over that. So I think, yes, ask hard questions. Just be mindful on how you do it. Instead of saying, like, I probably wouldn't say like, why should I take your money instead of like 5 other firms, blah, blah, blah. It'd probably be more along the lines of like, hey, talk to me about how your firm adds value. Talk to me about how you react when things go poorly. Talk to me about like what's your philosophy around valuation and terms, right? There's a lot of these other questions that you can ask that can get to the meat of what you really want to know without being offensive.
And by the time you ask those questions, then your time's up.
I mean,
but this is later on.
You're not asking these questions on day one.
Wait, how long is my NDA? How long do NDAs last for? 7 years?
I don't know. It depends on the NDA. Usually like 2 to 3 years.
2 to 3 years? Not sure if I can share, but one of the deals I sabotaged, I said I want to ask the person's background, and the co-founder threw a temper tantrum. They're like, you're trying to blow up my deal. And I said, no, anyone who's going to put money in the company, we should find out who they're investing in. We should find out who this person is, because it seemed like the investor wanted to play me and my other founder off of each other. And to me, that seems like a toxic behavior.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's like, that behavior is just a red flag, right? Anyways, because it's like, oh, well, if you're freaking out about that, maybe there's, where there's smoke, there's fire, and bigger issues. I read this article recently, and they talked about this question of like, what questions should you be asking a VC? And one of the things that I thought was an interesting question they were asking, I don't know that I agree, so I'd be curious on your thoughts, but they were saying that if you ask a venture investor what their performance is, they will tell you how many IPOs they've had. Specifically, if you ask them like, what's your failure rate, they won't know. They'll just be able to tell you like, we had a bunch of wins. And they were making the argument like, it's an important question to ask, because it gives you insight into how the VC, how well the VC knows their business and how they think about risk. And, are you just like one of a handful of companies and they just need one to hit? And once one of those starts to hit, they could care less about the rest.
Is that every fund though? They want 2 or 3 to hit?
Well, every fund does, but there's different philosophies on how you respond to the losers, right? In the portfolio. Like, one of my favorite VCs out there, there's two great VCs, but one of them is Brad Feld. And he talks about how as a VC, like a good VC will spend more time and energy helping the losers in their portfolio, like the companies that are going to end up losing the money or just kind of break even, than they do on the winners. And you would think it'd be the other way around. You'd think like the VC would spend most of the time with the winners and very little time with the companies that aren't going to make it. He's like, good VCs spend the time with the struggling companies, because it signals very strongly to other founders that you're the kind of person that rolls up their sleeves when the times get tough.
Okay.
But I think a lot of VCs and founders don't realize this until it's too late, actually take the opposite approach, which is I'm going to place a bunch of bets. I'm right there with you as long as things are going well. And as soon as they aren't, like, I'm done. I'm out. My checkbook is closed. My network is closed to you. You're a liability. You're not an asset. And all my time and energy is on my winners, right?
Okay.
Because I want to claim as much, recognition for those winners as I possibly can.
Okay. Can we talk about, do we want to go on the record and talk about feuding VCs in comparison to this? And no?
If you want.
Do you want to?
Sure.
Wait, you sure? Is that a sure? So let's talk about
it, and we can edit it out later if we don't
Let's
like
talk
it.
about VC strategy. So there are some VCs in Utah who are super, super founder friendly.
Mm-hmm.
And there are other VCs in Utah and that I know in South America and in San Francisco we are so hyper focused. Our website is literally just our logo and a splash page.
Yeah.
And you've got some ideas. We can talk about that. And
well, I mean, Benchmark. Go to Benchmark's website.
Mm-hmm.
It is literally like their logo, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the ultimate like power move.
Which to me is a signal of where they're hyper focused.
Sure.
And that focus is going to go through your entire fund. And if you're not one of the tops, you're good. But we're talking about like what questions to ask.
Yeah.
If a VC is helping their entire portfolio, it's great. But how much help can they really?
Yeah.
I don't think they're that helpful.
And look, I don't know that the response is the VC like takes a part-time job at the startup.
Mm-hmm. Right. The question I'd ask is, how are you going to help me get to my next round?
Yeah.
And what intros can you help me make?
I think that's valuable.
That's the main thing that I think is beneficial. Do you invest in deals for the second time?
Mm-hmm.
What would it take what would that take for my company to make that happen? And if not, how do you help me to get my next deal?
Right.
Because if not, you're not like, that's the biggest value that a VC adds.
Okay. That's fair. I don't disagree.
Or exit. Hey, we don't think you can win. So here's even the better one.
Yeah.
We think you're not a winner. We're going to get you acquired.
Yeah. See, this is where I think like it's more interesting to understand, not just like, tell me what your failure rate is, because a fund could have a very high failure rate, but that doesn't mean that they're like going to be a jerk through that failure process. Right. I'm thinking about a fund that we both know well. Like they are hyper focused on driving really good returns, and they're a seed fund, so they place a lot of bets. There are only a few of those that are going to win, but the ones that don't win, they spend a lot of time helping those founders get to a soft landing. They're not spending a ton of time running the company, right? That's not their job, but they are very thoughtful in, helping those founders like land at the next thing, land a soft landing, wind down the company in an orderly way, and then, support them on their next venture, right? That sort of thing. I think there are a lot of ways to be supportive of founders without saying like, oh, we're just going to keep writing you checks. Because frankly, like it doesn't really help at the end of the day, right? To just keep dribbling a little bit more and more money into these companies without getting them to some sort of landing.
Right. But I think the landing is, hey, we help you get to your next round.
Yep.
Or they do it themselves. They help you get your round eventually from someone else.
Yep.
Or they help you get acquired.
Yep.
Like that's the only value I see in a VC.
The only value. Oof.
Like the main thing I think of what you're looking for. I want cash now. I want
cash in the future.
And cash in the future. And or an exit.
Landing this thing. Yep.
I think because we had arguments about this over
I think
years,
there are ways in which VCs can add additional value, but I think that's fair. Like VCs can be helpful with hiring and
pro forma,
some landing customers, some things like that. I think talking to a VC,
recruiting.
Yeah, like recruiting. I think talking to a VC to understand the fundraising landscape is super important, because like sometimes I'll talk to founders and they're like, oh, VCs don't add any value, so I just don't even bother asking them. And it's like, no, VCs can add a lot of value. You just got to be thoughtful about like the value they're going to add and the expertise that they have. Like if they come in and they're giving you like product advice, probably more harmful than helpful. But if they're telling you like your metrics aren't good enough to merit the valuation you're seeking, you should probably listen to them, because this is what they do for a living. They've done like 100 times the number of deals you'll do in your entire life. And so like, you just got to be mindful about like where you're taking advice from them and on what topics.
I mean, I think one big benefit would be, how is a VC opening the Rolodex?
Right.
What are the last 5 intros they've made? Do they make intros? When I used to work with the Utah Angels, it was an early stage angel group.
Yep.
I had a personal goal of getting 2 people hired at other companies, either startups or somewhere in the tech space, every single month.
Yep. No, I think Rolodexes are, super helpful. Another question that I've been thinking a lot would be an interesting one to ask VCs is, tell me about like the last 2 or 3 deals you did, and go into depth. I want to know, how did you source the deal? What valuation did you pay? How much did you invest? Did you take a board seat? What were the terms like? What got you excited about the deal? Right? What were the dynamics, the elements that got you really excited? I think that can also give founders a lot of insight into...
I think most founders don't have this type of time with a VC.
Well,
you're assuming that they're all in this scenario, hey, there's a high probability we're going to fund you, then you can start asking questions.
Yes, that's true. But like, it's all dating, right? So you don't ask these questions on the first date, right? It's like going into a first date and being like, well, how many kids do you want to have, right? And like,
hey, with the right person, that's the right question.
Well, and then I've been in conversations with entrepreneurs, and we did have conversations that were hard in the first conversation. The last deal we did, I spent like 3 hours with the founder, just a block away, and we talked about all kinds of things, right? So, it ebbs and flows. It depends. Sometimes you have just a short amount of time to give the VC a pitch, and you're just trying to get enough excitement to get to the next meeting. But you should probably, just as you probably shouldn't jump into bed in the dating side right away, you probably should approach it similarly in the VC landscape of like, hey, even if we're moving quickly and we want to close in a relatively short time period, you should be spending time with this person, because you're going to be tied to the hip with them for years, if not, over a decade. And so I think it's helpful to at least get a good feel for who they are and start asking some of these pressing questions. I also think there's a lot of questions that you don't ask the VC, you ask the other founders that they backed. And I would talk to people that have been super successful, and I talk to people who have not been super successful that the VC has backed, and get a feel for like their experiences working with that individual. How do they approach like the boardroom? Are they inquisitive? Do they push back? Do they hold you to a high standard? Or are they like kind of a pushover? Or do they come unprepared, right? Or do they cause a fit in the boardroom, right? I was talking to a founder this week, and he was talking about how he did this exact diligence on a fund that they were looking at, maybe having invest. And he was like, yeah, there was one partner who came back with glowing reviews, and there was another partner at the same firm who, everybody said is a disaster and a train wreck. And he's like, I don't know, like I like the guy that we're probably going to get, but what happens if he gets hit by a bus and we end up with this other guy, right? So I think having some, doing kind of that diligence both on the individual as well as on the firm level can be super helpful and eye-opening. And sometimes I think it's better not to take, bad money than it is to take, any money at all.
People don't realize it can block a deal.
It can block a deal. It can set you up for failure. Life is short, here's the other thing. Like if you're struggling to raise money and you can't have hard conversations with your VC because they get flustered and embarrassed and upset or whatever it is, you probably shouldn't take money from them. And if they're the only ones who are willing to give you money, you should probably reassess your idea and maybe, go back to the drawing board and find something else. Anyways, that's my opinion, right? Other people may have different perspectives on that, right? Maybe it's just, hey, you raise the money you can, you just assume that all VCs are snakes. You keep them at arm's length and you just build. And, capital is capital. It all spends the same. So
depends what's attached to. Just they go back to the basics of what questions should you ask. I mean, I think it's when I've tried raising 6 months in advance, I start doing founder dating. Who's raised recently? Who did they raise from? What went well? What didn't go well? And you have to, it's one of the things you have to do if you think fundraising has to be in your cards.
Yep.
You do it 6 to 12 months before you need to do it.
Yep. No, I think that's super smart. And like some of the questions you're asking those founders, right, is like, how long does it take for them to make a decision and get you a term sheet? And like, because then it can give you a gauge of like, is this venture fund just kind of stringing me along? Or are they really interested? Right? Because you probably don't want to waste too much time on funds that just aren't really that interested.
Or spend a lot on legal to have them bail last minute.
Ugh, yeah, that's the worst.
Which happens.
Totally happens.
What brought up this? What was the genesis, my last question, that made you want to talk about this topic? Was there something that's happened to you or you've seen recently?
Well, so as you know, I'm working on this new podcast concept where I want to go and meet with VCs, as many as I possibly can, and ask them all the questions that I think founders should ask. Because to your point, most founders don't have time. They don't get that much time with the VC, especially in that first meeting. And there's all these questions that I think they should know about before going in, so they have a feel for who that VC is and whether or not they align well with the ethos of the founder and the entrepreneur. Like for example, like another really good question is, how do you as a venture fund make investment decisions, right? Who gets a say? Is it just you write the checks as the partner, or do you have to get approval from your other partners? Like what does that process look like? And every venture fund has a slightly different process, and it can give you a lot of insight into, how to navigate that process, how you're doing in the process, like all of those things, if you can kind of peel back some of those layers. So that's the goal, is to provide more founders with this information, because it's not found on websites. Most podcasts don't ask about these types of things. If they do, it's tangential, and they may cover one or two of those things, right? Like, tell me about your strategy, right? But I want to get into the brass tacks of like, how do you source deals? What's your preferred way to source deals? Which that's why I like this question of like, tell me about the last couple deals you did, and let's go deep, right? Let's talk about like how you sourced it, why you got excited, what kind of check you wrote into the company. What were the things that got you over the hump? Because you see so many deals, you say no so many times. So like there's a big barrier to get over. And by doing that, give founders really good insight into like, hey, this VC really likes it if you can like paint a very compelling story, in this way, right? And this VC, by the way, like they're on year 5 of their fund, and they're probably tapped out, but they're probably still taking the meeting with you, even though they're like on the verge of becoming a zombie fund. And like, who knows if you're going to be the last check or if they've already written that last check out of the fund, right? So like just some of these details that I think and I hope will be really helpful to founders.
Okay. Well, I'm excited.
Awesome.
When does the first one drop? Because you've already done your first interview, right?
I've done my first interview. Yeah, I'm hoping to do like around 15 interviews and then start dropping them.
Okay. Sounds good.
Awesome.
All right, guys, go to www.vc.fm. If you've got more questions, put it in the comments, hit us up on Instagram, TikTok, places like that.
Are there questions that you as a founder have found to be really insightful and effective? Please share those so that those of our other listeners can learn from you. Thank you.
Thanks.